All righty. So, Vito, I have a question.
Yeah, I'm definitely here for you to answer your questions. Go ahead.
Do you have a name for that thing behind you?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's an alpha predator.
An alpha predator.
Yes.
Does it have a nickname, though?
So when you're in the water, the guy who's on the top of the food chain, right, is usually the one who wins. So
clearly that's you.
All right, well, when I'm in the water, I project myself as the alpha predator. So sharks are scared of me.
I think you do that above water too.
No, but I mean the shark, above water is it's like a woman.
Can you do your impression of Baby Shark?
No, but it's like a woman. It's like in control. It's the alpha predator, and anything that gets out of line gets basically eaten and thrown out. It's like divorce ended up in the ditch with no money. It's the same as being eaten.
Wow, that's pretty dark.
Yeah.
Between your water and your marital advice, I think we should stick to mortgage. I don't know.
I'm thinking if you guys learned one thing on all of these podcasts, it was JMAs, joint marital assets. Never give a gift. Always buy, the family an asset. So if I was married to you, I wouldn't give you a gift of a car for your birthday or whatever. Who cares what the day is? I would buy a car for the family, and then it's a joint marital asset, and you can't take it from me in the divorce because it was a gift.
First of all,
you're too old for me. That's why we could talk about this in
No, first of all, what I was going to say is I believe that marriage should be forever.
Yeah, but it's not. It's the shark comes from the depths of the blue and tears its prey up and leaves it to die in a ditch. It just happens. It's a part of life. You women are all mean. Are you okay?
I feel like we might need an intervention of sorts. I feel like at some point in your life you've had a bad experience. But so it's week 11, and we're talking about the three major things that are red flags to say maybe you should slow down and look at your finances before you buy a home. So we look at, and you like to spin it in a more positive manner, and I appreciate that about you, glass half full. But sometimes there truly are problems that need to be addressed prior to home ownership.
So these are like self-evaluation things before you would call a real estate agent or a mortgage person. These are things you might want to look at before you make that first step.
Exactly.
Okay. So those three things are credit, assets, and income stability.
So not just income, but the stableness of the income.
And being able to prove the past to predict the future.
So when I do a pre-approval, the first thing I look at is the credit. So why don't we start there?
All right.
So when we're looking at credit.
Scores. That's it.
We look at scores. Kidding. So that matters though, right?
Credit scores definitely matter. But a lot of people think they need, a blazing good score of 760 score to qualify for a mortgage, which is totally untrue, right?
Oh, no, they can at 580 and up.
Low 600s is a doable, easy deal.
And in some cases down to 580.
Yep.
So that's really not the red flag that says, no, you can't go forward. I think what we want to point out is if you know that you have credit card debt and automobile loans and collections, and you're not paying your current liabilities or your current obligations on time right now.
How could you possibly pay a new mortgage?
Right. And so from a lender's perspective, we're looking at the credit report and saying, okay, they were late on their Amex card last month. They haven't paid their car payment in 3 months. And they have a ton of inquiries from mortgage companies. But unfortunately, if you're not paying those small obligations from an underwriting perspective or a lender's perspective, we're thinking if you can't pay that small bill, how do we?
What's the chances you're going to pay
Yeah,
a mortgage?
So to know that you're paying your minimum obligations right now on time, and that your credit report does reflect that you've been paying all of your obligations on time. The other thing that I think is important to point out from credit reports is a lot of times, and I'm sure you've ran across this, you'll have a client call in and they'll say, I have a 850 credit score. And they forgot that they co-signed for their daughter.
Right, one of the kids or something.
Yeah. And so they're not checking up to see if the kid is paying that payment.
And guess what?
They're not.
They're not. And
They're
guess what that did to mom's 850 score?
And I think the misconception about co-signing, which I'm not a huge fan of co-signing, but I don't think I'd even co-sign for one of my kids. I'd rather just buy it for them than co-sign for them.
100%.
Because we work really hard to get your credit score to a certain place, and you're trying to do something good for your child or your friend or your family member. But what you're really saying in co-signing is, if this person does not pay, I agree to pay on their behalf.
Which means you need to be looking over their shoulders every single month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a lot. So how do you know if they're paying or they're not paying? And I can't tell you in 20 years the amount of times I've pulled credit and seen like everything else is spotless on the credit report, but this one account is reporting badly.
What's this?
And it's usually where they've co-signed for someone.
So to be clear, missed payments will not deny a mortgage loan, right? Because something happens, a hurricane came, I left my house, I forgot to make a credit card payment one time. That's not going to dismantle your mortgage loan opportunities. Some of it just requires explanations, right?
And sometimes it's time.
But if you're late on everything and you haven't paid anything on time in the last 3 months, let's take care of that first before you reach out, right? Okay, so that's something that you want to think about.
What about forbearance? And then that's been a big word thrown around for the past 24, 36 months because of COVID. So there were a lot of folks in forbearance on their mortgages or their student loans.
So some forbearance isn't bad, right? So student loans, everyone's in forbearance right now because the government basically just said, hey, we're going to give everyone a break. So that's not a bad thing, right? But what about forbearance on your mortgage payments?
What about forbearance on say, a car payment? And I think to understand the way a lender would look at it, you have to understand really truly what you're saying when you go into forbearance. So forbearance says, listen, Vito, you owe me $150,000 and you can pay me today if you'd like, but you owe me $150,000.
Right.
And you're making monthly payments, but you get yourself into a bit of a pickle and you call and you're like, I need to go into forbearance. Forbearance is saying, I don't have the means because of a hardship to pay this. So we're going to make arrangements
to pay it at a later time.
Yep. So when you agree to go into forbearance, even if you don't, some people agree to do it just because the creditor calls and says, hey, we can put you into forbearance.
Like, hey, I could have a couple months off. I'm going to Vegas.
I'm going to Vegas, right? But they don't understand the ramification is you've just said, for all intents and purposes, I can't, I'm struggling with meeting my financial obligations.
And now I want to buy a vacation home in the mountains.
And I can't because
I'm in forbearance.
Yep. So that's a big one.
All right. So what's next? Is it assets?
What about student loans on credit reports?
Oh, staying with credit reports. So, okay. Yeah, you can be in forbearance. In fact, a lot of people are in forbearance on student loans, right? And just because you're in forbearance on a student loan doesn't stop you from getting a mortgage loan.
What do you have to do?
I mean, if it were me, I would just pay the student loans, right? But for a lender, we're going to calculate a minimum payment, and we're going to subtract that from your spending ability, basically, right? So if you have, let's just say you have a $100,000 student loan, we're going to take $500 of your purchasing power at the best case scenario and take that away from you. Right? We're not going to make you pay it every single month.
But we're going to calculate it into
We're simply
what we think
saying if you had to start making your student loan payment, we're going to project it.
So we're budgeting in $500 a month towards that payment.
Awesome.
Cool. So what are we going to next?
Well, like I was headed that way.
And then I cut you off.
It's all right.
It's okay.
Put me right in the ditch. Like where I end up, All right. So let's talk about assets. All right. So assets are basically money you can touch, right?
So what's the red flag in a bank statement? So typically we're asking for what, 2 months?
2 months of bank statements. And in this conversation, we're talking about things that should deter you from applying for a mortgage, right? And I don't think anything should deter you. I think you should call and talk to your mortgage person and let them make the decision, right?
So assets, if you're looking, you've got a pre-approval in your hands and you're looking for the things that might stand out on that pre-approval as a no, or this is a red flag. One of those things would be overdrafts, right?
Bounce checks, overdrafts, absolutely.
So your bank statement typically at the bottom will show you how many overdrafts you've had in a year.
Year-to-date overdrafts.
Yeah. So
or maybe just year-to-date overdraft fees.
Yeah. So then when you look at that, the lender's saying, okay, if they can't manage
just their daily spending,
then
how?
So it doesn't mean that you can't get a mortgage with one singular overdraft or even 2 or 3 if there's an isolated event that causes it.
Explanations.
But if there's a pattern, right?
Right. Would you lend somebody money who can't even manage their own checking account?
Yeah.
Question's probably no.
So I think it's not really, we were talking about like, this sounds kind of like a Debbie Downer, like all the reasons you can't get a mortgage, but it's really not, you can't get a mortgage. It's things to contemplate and really look into. It's kind of like housekeeping for your personal finances, because these are the 3 things that immediately we're looking at when you send us your documents.
And they're pretty easy things. It's like, if you could check off these boxes and you're like, nope, no bounce checks, no overdrafts, no late credit cards. And then the next thing we talk about is income. I'm like, you need to apply for a mortgage.
Yeah, exactly.
We could probably get it done.
And if you say, yeah, I do have that, then you start to clean that up and contact somebody 60, 90 days later, and it looks a lot better when you apply.
Yep, absolutely.
So
finally,
income.
Stability of income.
So that's a confusing one for most, right? Because I just started a job. I'm working 20 hours this week. They guarantee me 10 hours a week, but sometimes I work 30. So how do we calculate that?
So I think with new jobs, it's super difficult. My wife would always say the past will predict the future, right? But if we don't have a past at all, it's not possible to predict the future, right?
So if you started a brand new job that was 40 hours a week and the employer said it's 40 hours a week.
Pretty easy, 40 hours a week. Let's say $20 an hour. It's $800 a week, 52 weeks in a year.
Yep.
12 months. that's so easy to calculate income. So easy. But if you start that same job in the first week, you work 16 hours, and the second week you worked 36 hours, and then you worked 39 hours, the underwriter can see this in your pay stubs, and they're like, ooh, there's more to the story.
Yeah, or we need some history so that we can average out those hours and understand what it looks like you're going to get on an ongoing basis.
And some people have varying hour jobs that they've been at for 2 years. Well, it's pretty easy. We look at W-2, we look at year to date, we do the math. It's easy.
Yeah. But if it's brand new, that would be a difficult thing and might require that you have some history behind you.
No different than recently self-employed, right?
Right. So I just opened up a business.
Yep.
And for this example, I just opened up a donut shop, a bakery.
Yep.
And I'm 6 months into it. I say, hey, Vito, I've made $10,000 a month for the past 6 months. Can I get a mortgage?
So there's no past of expenses until we have a tax return, right?
Well, why couldn't I give you a P&L?
Because the P&L is just you putting numbers on a piece of paper, right?
So what is the underwriter looking for?
The underwriter is looking for what you actually tell the government you make, right? So you made 60 grand, let's say in a year, and then you had these expenses, and then you had what was left. This is what you're paying taxes on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is what we're going to use as income. Now there's some math behind it, right? But essentially without a tax return with this business, we cannot calculate income.
So, and the other piece to it is, and I like to put in the other piece, is that we look for third-party verification. So with bank statements, we're looking for the banking institution. with
Credit. We're looking at the credit reporting institutions.
with
Tax returns. We're looking at the government.
so I could easily just fill out my tax return at home and hand it to you, but we have to actually validate that with the IRS.
Yeah.
Make sure that they both match. So if you're newly and
And
self-employed,
this is really for newly self-employed
yes.
because
So that if you get past that first year and you're working in a job or your business is something that immediately preceding you were doing something similar.
so you managed a bakery and now
No,
you own and operate a bakery.
If I can prove that and it immediately proceeds, I can get
1
by
year
with
tax
1 year.
return.
Yeah.
Otherwise 2.
Otherwise 2. And so if you're freshly self-employed, you might want to pump the brakes on getting a traditional loan right out of the gate because there's not enough history there for an underwriter to be able to approve the loan. Now, that being said, there are other options, though. And I think next week we're going to be talking about the DSCR loan. We're going to be talking about the bank statement loan.
So these are like the big words, right? In mortgage debt servicing coverage. So if like the rental payment on the house you're buying covers the mortgage payment,
If it's an investment property.
it works.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you're
Or
self-employed.
1099s, right? We can just do no tax returns and 1099s or bank statements.
So this was week 11. And next week we have
What week was it?
11. And next week we have Nathan doing a small business spotlight.
Nathan Davis.
And we also have some DSCR or debt service coverage ratio loan things going on.
What's the small business spotlight?
It's a secret.
Is it?
That's a surprise.
All right.
You have to tune in next week to find out.
Do you know?
I do.
Why don't you tell us?
I'm not going to tell you.
All right.
I'll tell them. So it's the Freedom Boat Club.
What?
What?
Am I invited to this one?
Nope.
Yeah. Why bring the person who's on the boat the most to the Freedom Boat Club podcast?
Because he's not going to rent a boat.
My money don't jiggle jiggle, it folds. My boat doesn't wiggle wiggle.
It trolls. My money doesn't wiggle wiggle. It folds.
You never heard that before?
I've heard it before, but you shouldn't do that ever again.
Really?
Ever. Do it again,
No.
please.
Can you insert the song while I'm doing this? My money don't jiggle jiggle, it folds. What's the next sign? We need to. My money don't jiggle jiggle, it folds. Song lyrics.
Oh, please.
My money don't jiggle jiggle, it folds. I'd like to see you wiggle wiggle for sure. It makes me want to dribble dribble, you know. Riding in my Fiat, you really have to see it. 6'2" in my compact, no slack. The seats go back. I've got my knack to relax in my mind, sipping some red wine. Shepherd's Bush, my compact push. Notting Hill Gates, my Fiat skates. With the crate of my Cabernet, but not today, because I gotta drive, I wanna stay alive. Not cause it's illicit. Do I have to get explicit? As a matter of fact, I sip on the cognac. In this case, it was just yak. With Big and Reese, 200 diamonds in their piece, I'm trying to get mine so I can shine. My money don't jiggle jiggle, it folds. I want to see you wiggle wiggle for sure. It makes me want to dribble dribble, you know. Riding in my Fiat, you really gotta see it.
You have a Fiat?
Bro, I would look good in a Fiat.
Would you? With the top down?
Isn't that song playing in the background? Batman in a little car.
And that's a wrap. We're done now, right? Because that was pricey.